Welcome to my scientifically informed insider look at mental health topics. If you find this video to be interesting or helpful, please like it and subscribe to my channel. Hello, this is Dr. Grande. Today's question asks, is there a way to be kind when rejecting someone? So this question is really specifically talking about someone who makes a romantic advance. And I've seen this question a number of times, and it almost always involves a situation where a man is asking a woman on a date, and the woman is rejecting the man. So I'm going to use that as the example here for this video. Also, I'm talking here about something that happens around the first sign of romantic interest. Again, when somebody asks somebody out on a date, potentially at the very beginning of a romantic relationship, not a rejection that could occur later on in a romantic relationship. For example, not the rejection that would happen when somebody wants to get a divorce. That's a whole different type of rejection. So here we're talking about this initial stage of romance. And even within this context, there are different types of romantic advances. On one side, you have the stranger asking somebody on the street for a date. And on the other side, you have the coworker who you've known for 10 years asking you out. Now, the question I'll try to answer here is really about what is the most kind, not necessarily what should be done. Many people would assume, of course, that those two objectives are accomplished with the same behavior, but I'm not sure that's actually true. But of course, there is a lot of overlap between what should be done and what is kind, just not 100% overlap. So whenever you have a rejection, of course, there's two sides to it. You have the person rejecting another person, and then you have that individual's perception, so how the person who's being rejected perceives that rejection. So this gets us into the research literature around rejection sensitivity, because this is important to understand because it's a part of rejection. Rejection sensitivity is a disposition to anxiously expect, readily perceive, and intensely react to rejection by a significant other. So people who have high rejection sensitivity are more likely to break up in romantic relationships. They're also more likely to have lower relationship satisfaction. People with high rejection sensitivity often behave in a way that elicits rejection. We refer to this as a self-fulfilling prophecy. And they're more likely to be violent in a romantic relationship. Now, people with low rejection sensitivity have some difficulties as well. They can more accurately detect rejection-relevant cues when they see them directed toward other people, more so than they can when they're directed toward themselves. So they're not good at picking up rejection-relevant cues if those cues are pointed toward them. So this kind of characteristic seems to be aligned a little bit with narcissism, when somebody perceives elements directed toward them differently than they see elements directed toward others. And what we see here is actually both high and low rejection sensitivity are connected to narcissism. High rejection sensitivity is connected to vulnerable narcissism, and low rejection sensitivity is connected to grandiose narcissism. Now, regardless of rejection sensitivity, rejections can be painful. Whether somebody has high, low, or somewhere in the middle with rejection sensitivity, this is an unpleasant experience. And it's often a product about how somebody thinks about a certain outcome by asking for a date, meaning people tend to get their hopes up and not reading nonverbal communication well, so moving ahead too fast. And for some people, this is really their style. If they find somebody physically attractive, they ask them out. That's their mechanism for learning more about somebody, for exploring romantic interest. And they do this even if they don't know the person very well. People who tend to do this get rejected more often, which is, of course, completely understandable. They're coming into a situation without knowing somebody well and moving right to asking them out. For most people, though, even before there's a clear romantic interest, there's a bit of a stair-step progression with relationships that includes nonverbal and verbal components. For example, and again I'm talking about here a man who would be asking a woman out. A man points out to a woman that her dress is attractive. And then maybe the woman, a week later, or maybe more, says something like, "I like that tie," right? So compliments the man's tie. Then it gets a little more personal. The man says, "I always like to see you smile." The woman says, "You always make me laugh," right? So you see this progression. The man compliments the woman's demeanor, disposition, or personality, maybe saying something like, you always see the best in people. And maybe at this point he holds eye contact a little longer than usual. The woman compliments the man's character in return. You're always so kind to people. Again, adding that increased eye contact, which can be holding eye contact just a half a second longer. Just that small difference can be an attraction cue. So then it moves up again, right? So then we see the man kind of casually saying he would like to find the right person someday. And the woman says that she feels the same way. So again, we have this stair-step effect, reciprocity. The intimacy elevates, the connection grows stronger, and each person gradually contributes to the development of the relationship. And they look for the next signal that tells them they can increase the intensity just a little bit. So if the stair steps continue, if the couple keeps moving up those steps, then eventually the man or the woman requests a date. And when this happens, it's not a surprise. It's expected. Now, if the next expected signal isn't sent, nothing happens. The man or the woman, not seeing the next signal, backs off. They take the hint. So rejection can really happen for a variety of reasons. One reason is somebody didn't read the signals correctly. Another reason would be that an individual wanted to believe the signals were there when in fact they were not there. So rejection can be a learning opportunity, or it could be that the signals were not in fact clear, or it could just be that somebody wasn't someone else's type. And this is just the way it is sometimes. Not everybody is going to be a good match for those they find attractive. Another important thing to keep in mind is when it comes to rejection, what's really at stake? Asking somebody out on a date is not the same as asking someone to marry you. A long-term relationship may be at stake, because usually they start with a date, yes, but the vast majority of dates will not result in a long-term relationship. So with rejection, what's really at stake most of the time is somebody's feelings. Somebody's feelings are at issue. Is there a way to reject somebody and spare their feelings? So I'm going to give a general list of do's and don'ts in this situation. This is on the rejection side, mostly. They may not apply to specific situations, of course, again, just general. I'm going to assume here that both people are in fact available, so they're both single, no one's married here or in a long-term relationship. And I'm also going to assume for these examples that some sort of pre-existing relationship does exist. So the man, the woman are friends, acquaintances, colleagues, not strangers on the street. So the most kind response to an unwanted romantic advance most likely would start simply with the word no. It's clear, fast, efficient. It doesn't remain open for interpretation. And of course, it's okay to say no and then add something else. This would be expected. Something like, I don't think we're a good match. Thank you for asking. I'm flattered. I'd really like to stay friends. But in general, the more that's added to the word no, the worse things get. The complete answer, including the word no, should be brief. Again, if kindness is the objective. Also, I think it's kind to keep the request confidential, and I think it's okay to say that as well. Say something like, I won't tell anybody that you ask. Right? Not that it's necessarily embarrassing, but it may be because they were rejected. I think it's certainly okay to say as well, I don't have an answer right now, if in fact that's true. Can I think about this for a day or two? But most people know when they're asked on a date what the answer is going to be. So sometimes when people say, I don't have an answer right now, that's really them trying to avoid that tough rejection. They don't want to tell the person no in that moment. They don't want to hurt somebody's feelings, which of course is understandable. So in terms of kindness, the answer is fairly straightforward. What about the other side? What about the don'ts? Right? And I have, of course, more don'ts than do's in this situation. I would say, don't say, you're too good for me, or I'm not good enough for you, or you deserve somebody better. It's not you, it's me. These lines are used quite a bit, and generally, I don't think they're helpful. Another thing I would avoid would be saying, yes, I'll go out with you, but understand nothing's ever going to happen. This one is remarkably common, but I'm not sure what it achieves, and in terms of kindness, it does seem to be quite unkind. Another thing I've seen a few times I find interesting is this idea of saying no, but then saying, just kidding, the answer is yes, right? Because you want to see how somebody's going to react to being rejected. I don't think this is a good idea in terms of kindness, although oddly enough, in a perfect world, this is something you could say. And I'll talk a little bit more about this later. In terms of additional don'ts, I would say don't laugh hysterically really not laughing at all would be better, right? Any type of laughing would be a bit unkind. And there's other responses I find as unhelpful, like the "are you kidding" response or "what are you talking about" response. Those generally don't go over too well either in terms of kindness. Some other responses I've heard of that I think are also a bit unkind. "I don't want to settle." That one's a little rough. "I like your personality, but I don't want someone who's unattractive." Well, that's kind of mean too. "I want somebody who's going to be successful in the future." Again, that one's kind of mean. And I think that one could be open for somebody trying to achieve success and then coming back and asking someone out again. Then there's this debate around saying "I'm sorry." I know people have strong feelings about this, and I understand the argument. If someone asks someone else out on a date, if a man asks a woman out on a date, the woman doesn't have anything to apologize for by saying no, right? I agree with that. But I also understand that saying "I'm sorry" is kind of a normal, natural response. So I don't think this is really unkind or kind. Now, another area in terms of the don'ts I would mention here is don't give a reason that can be contested. It never works out as someone would hope. And I think it invites argument, and someone becomes encouraged to attempt to ask again, to ask someone out on a date again. For example, when saying no, when rejecting somebody, saying, "I'm really looking for someone who's more confident." Now they might go out and try to appear more confident and then come back and ask you again. "I really want somebody who has a stable job." Now they might go get a job and again come back and ask again. Or there's this one saying, "Really, you're not my type." The problem here is this doesn't offer enough specificity, and it can really mean anything, and it leaves someone open to this question of, well, what is your type? So this just prolongs things. And again, in terms of kindness, this whole rejection, this invitation and rejection, all being contained in a brief duration, is more kind. Now, on the other side, I wanted to address this because I've seen this interesting scenario a few times. If we look at the man's point of view, so we've seen these different techniques for men to avoid rejection. So they want to ask somebody out, but they don't want to be rejected. So they come up with these, I guess, somewhat clever schemes, at least at first glance, but I don't think ultimately they work out. So one that I'll mention here is this idea of a man asking a woman out and then saying, "Don't answer. Just let me know when the answer is yes." So it's like kind of a sneaky way of doing things, right? So you ask somebody out on a date and you say, "I don't want an answer, but when the answer is yes," so it's kind of presumptive, "then come and see me. And if you don't come and see me, I won't bother you again." So in a sense, it's a mechanism to try to avoid rejection and to do so seeming like you're not being pushy. But the problem is, again, at first glance it might seem clever, but in the long run it really creates more stress, because now every time there's an interaction, there'll be this expectation that this might be the day when there's an answer. So again, it's really more stressful and kind of manipulative, right? It's just straightforward to go and ask somebody out and expect a yes or a no. There's nothing wrong with that. Yes, the rejection hurts, but it can't be avoided through kind of manipulative techniques, in my opinion anyway. So in consideration of all this, what we know about rejection sensitivity and this general list of do's and don'ts, what do we have here? Well, the truest kindness in rejection comes through clear rejection. Rejection that has finality. Now, in terms of how to handle rejection, which is another related question I've heard many times, I would say consider a clear rejection a favor. It saves time. It allows you to find someone who's a better match. So in terms of how to respond to a rejection, I would say something like, "Thank you for being clear with me. I respect your answer. I hope we can still be friends," if that's relevant to this situation. In terms of unhelpful ways to respond to rejection, I don't think it's a good idea to say, "Oh, I understand. It makes sense, right? I'm not a good person. You can find somebody better," or to even take it further and say, "I'm an awful person. I completely understand the rejection. I don't even know what I was thinking by asking." This is kind of like a guilt trip, and I don't think it makes somebody look good. I don't think it's a kind of a favorable way to appear. Again, I think it's just better to be straightforward and say, "I respect your answer," and I think it's a good idea at that point just to leave the person alone. Don't bring it up again, right? The question was asked, the question was answered, and that would be, in most situations, the end of it. So I mentioned earlier about how people could say no, but then say they're just kidding and answer yes, and how, of course, we can't do this, but you can actually learn a lot about a person by how they accept rejection, right? So this is the irony here. Someone who accepts rejection well, but not too well, actually has the highest probability of being a good romantic partner. So knowing how somebody would respond to rejection would actually be very useful to know before making a decision of acceptance or rejection. But again, as I mentioned, that's in a perfect world, and unfortunately that isn't available. So I know whenever I talk about topics like romantic advances and rejection and kindness and all this, there are going to be a variety of opinions, people who agree with me and disagree with me, and have other examples from their life experience about how this sometimes plays out. Please put your opinions and thoughts in the comment section. They always generate a really interesting dialogue. As always, I hope you found this description of how to be kind when rejecting someone to be interesting. Thanks for watching.